Well, g'day guys, welcome to Life in the Peloton. I'm Mitch Docker, and have I got a banging episode for you this week? This is a big one. Before we get to talk about that, let's talk about our proud partners who are bringing this episode to you each and every week this year, Rapha. Now, Rapha have gone away and they've done something really exciting. They've gone and collaborated with Amsterdam-based streetwear brand Pitta, launching on the 23rd following its announcement of the Pitta cycling team. Now, this team was formed with a really cool mission to inspire people from all backgrounds to take to two wheels. The Pitta cycling team has partnered with Rapha to create role models that inspire the next generation of cyclists, while making the sport accessible to anyone, however, and wherever they choose. They've made a really cool, slick-looking kit, and the heart of the team crest is a gecko. It's chosen for speed and that flamboyant appearance. The team's motto is "One more road to cross." I think it's a really cool collaboration because it encapsulates Rapha and Pitta's shared mission to inspire people of all backgrounds to just embrace cycling lifestyle. That's what we're trying to do here at Life in the Peloton, is just spread the word of how great this sport really is. Speaking of that, let's talk about the legend himself. This episode, Cadel Evans, 2011 Tour de France winner. 2009 Road World Champion. He's won 2 stages of the Tour de France. He's been to the Olympics 4 times. He's one of 3 non-Europeans to win the Tour de France. Greg LeMond before him and Egan Bernal after. But before all that, he was a mountain bike rider. He won the World Cup mountain bike 2 times. He was the youngest winner of the World Cup mountain bike at 21 years old. Yet, he is the oldest Tour de France winner post-wartime at age 34. A 20-year career which started successfully and ended successfully. He is just undoubtedly a legend of cycling, and he was inducted into the Australian Sporting Hall of Fame in 2020. He has been made an Order of Australia in 2013 as well. He is Australia's most celebrated cyclist. This was a really big podcast for me to do. I know in the whole world of cycling, everyone knows how great a cyclist Cadel Evans is. He is a legend, but when it comes to Australia, like I said, he is the top of the tree. So it was a really big podcast and a big honor for me to talk to him. But I did take a little bit of a different angle on this podcast because there was so much to cover with Cadel. You know, of course, the Tour de France win, of course, the World Championships. We touch on that as well, don't get me wrong. But I really wanted to talk about the way that he paved his path as a young cyclist, how determined he was, and what he has done to make it to the top, and that continual battle. Even when he was in the World Tour, he had to continually battle the 2-time second places at the Tour de France to finally get that win at the Tour de France. This is the stuff that I really wanted to know, and I wanted for young riders to hear that story so they know what it takes to get to the top when they've got that goal. I think that was most inspiring for me to hear from Cadel, to tell that story about where he came from, his passion throughout his whole cycling career. Now, people ask me, what are the things that I have taken over from my pro life? And aside from my riding legs, of course, one other thing is AG1. I was using AG1 when I was racing overseas for a few reasons. It's more than just greens, it's a comprehensive blend of vitamins and minerals, probiotics and superfood complexes. It helps provide digestive support, immunity support, metabolism, energy and stress support. It's that all-in-one. Of course, I'm no longer at the pointy end of professional sport, but I still want to feel good for my everyday life, for my family, for my kids. I like to start my day with AG1 because I know from then on, whatever happens, I've got a nice nutritional foundation for the day. It's like a nice, good kickstart. It's a part of my routine. I simply get up first thing in the morning, I grab my shaker, I add some water, a scoop of AG1, shake it up and drink it down. It's that simple. Another great thing too is AG1 have portion-sized travel packs to take with you when you're on the road to make things just that little bit easier so you're not missing out as well. It really is my go-to these days, and it's something I look forward to every day when I wake up. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, AG1 is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Now head across to drinkag1.com/lifeinthepeloton. That's drinkag1.com/lifeinthepeloton. Check it out. Now guys, sit back, Enjoy this one. This is Cadel Evans. We're on the eve of the Tour de France, so I thought this was an appropriate episode to put out just before we kick off next month with the Tour de France. This is the Cadel Evans story, guys. I really hope you enjoy it. Well, here we are. This has been a long and waited podcast, but this is one of the best ones. Cadel Evans, unfortunately, we can't do this in person. We're both Melburnians, well, Victorians. You're not quite Melbourne-based these days, but you're overseas. We're at your other base in Switzerland. Welcome to the podcast. Great to talk to you, Life in the Peloton.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. My first question is, hang on, you're meant to be asking me, Life in the Peloton. Shouldn't you be changing it now to Life outside of the Peloton? Because that's probably something that we're probably going to be touching on.
That's a very good point. And I had to think about this when I was rehashing what the podcast was going to be sort of 18 months ago. I'm like, oh, what could it be? I'm not in the Peloton anymore. But I went, hang on. There's pro Pelotons, but there's also a lot of other Pelotons out there. There's gravel Pelotons. There's bunch rides, which are Pelotons. You know, there's many Pelotons out there. There's even commuters who make Pelotons in the morning. They may not speak to each other, but that is some of the fiercest racing I've ever seen. So I want to explore all the Pelotons out there. The Hell Ride, you know, get in that Peloton. You know about that. These mountain bike Pelotons that I experienced over in Cape Epic, and I'm experiencing new Pelotons. I can tell you, Cadel, that I tell you, the World Tour Peloton was tough, but these other ones, they've got a lot of different rules and stuff that I'm still trying to work out.
Yes.
Well, I want to go back to the beginning, and I know you've grown up just in the north of Australia. You grew up just outside of Katherine, a place that I've never been to, a place that I don't think a lot of Australians have been to, let alone on a bike. What was it like growing up in Katherine, you know, as a young boy?
Yeah, I was really young then, and we moved away when I was 3. The reason you haven't been there is because an Aboriginal settlement. It was called Bamilli when we lived there. It's called Barunga now. My mother went back with, she did an interesting thing with a friend of mine, a journalist for L'Equipe, and she went back and visited and, you know, got the permits and went there with his name's Philippe Legar. He's a journalist for L'Equipe, and they did this sort of in-depth review of non-European based winners of the Tour de France. And so he went to Colombia, he went to Barunga, and so yeah, my mother's been back, but it is a long way from anywhere, and it was different. I only have very vague memories because I was very young, but my parents went up there when they were very young, and I came along, and they went up there for work opportunities, adventure, whatever. And yeah, that's how I on my passport, and it says born in Katherine.
It does say it everywhere when you look you up. It does say that, but I think more interesting for me, and you can say this is not more interesting, sorry, but a bit more closer to home. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I sort of feel like the cycling part of your life really accelerated when you were down in Melbourne. You moved to a place that I've ridden past many a times, the training grounds where I grew up as well, sort of probably 10 years after you, or maybe even more. These were the roads in the north. I'm talking about Plenty. I'm talking about Yan Yean Road. I'm talking about the Plenty Gorge. Mountain biking, which is now a bit of a mountain bike mecca. A mate of mine, a mutual friend of ours, Andy White, aka Fixo, he's named one of the trails out there, the Cadel Evans Heritage Trail. But the question I have for you, what was it like growing up out there, and also just, you know, riding through the gorge back in those days on a mountain biker? Because if anyone doesn't know, Cadel cut his teeth in cycling as a mountain biker.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention it in that regard. And we moved back to Melbourne when I was about 12 years old, 11 years old. I was in first year high school, and we moved out to Plenty, Yan Yean Road, because my family have horses, and so land and things, and I was living out there. I was like, oh, I'm on my own out here. How am I going to get around? And I'll get a bike. Oh, maybe I'll get a mountain bike, because there was no footpaths or anything, and the road was busy, so at least there's a nice little dirt path on the side of the road, and I can ride my bike and just to start riding to school and have some independence. And that's really how mountain biking started for me, or cycling started for me. It was a cousin of a cousin who we're still friends today, but he was sort of a little bit like cycling, watched the Tour de France and like mountain biking, and it was him. He's like, oh, let's go and do this ride. And we went. I remember the first mountain bike ride I ever did. We went up the Mount Everard Trail, and then we rode down the road back through St Andrews and back. I was like, okay, it was like 60k, and we were like 12, 13 years old or so.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't know anything, and it's like, oh, well, that was good. And then he's like, oh, there's a race on in Blue Lake. What's this Blue Lake? I didn't even know about Blue Lake. I go there and I'm like, wow, look at these trails. It's like 5K from home. I think my mum drove us out there. She dropped us off. That day it was the Fat Tire Flyers. They ran 2 races in one day and they had this little race, and I signed up, paid my $10 deposit for a number, and start this race. And there's all, with my little simple little bike at a Specialized rock hopper sport, which I bought like secondhand, very modest, awesome. Very modest beginnings. And I did my little race in sub juniors under 16, and that was all right. And then there was another one in the afternoon. I did that one, and that was. And I remember my mum came and picked us up afterwards. Oh, how was that? What do you think? It was hard. Oh, did you enjoy it? Yeah, I did actually. Oh, would you like to do it again? Yes, I would. And so I went and did some other Fat Tire Flyer races and some other races run by other race organisers in Melbourne, and that's where it really started. And really my own initiative. I never had anyone in my family in cycling. It was purely just I wanted to do it. I was riding to school. It was 10 Ks each way to school, but just riding there with my VCE books in my backpack. I was already doing 100 Ks a week just doing that. And then started, I met up with a group, and one of the Walker's Wheels, a bike shop in Montmorency, they used to have these meet in the morning, Peloton, small group, and go for these rides. And on that ride, there was a guy who had a bit of experience in coaching and things, and started talking to him and learning and so on. And it was all very pre-internet. There was no information, but I just discovered that I got my first mountain bike magazines, read about Ned Over and John Tomac. What, you can be professional about this? What have I got to do that? No, whatever it takes, I'm doing it. Well, I don't care how much I have to train. That's what I'm doing. And from then on, I just became, I eat, I sleep, I do school, I ride my bike, and that's it. And then I just became in this like almost tunnel vision, but I was like 15 years old, 16 years old. I'm going to be a professional, and I'm going to do whatever is necessary to do that. And I don't care how hard it is. I'm going to do it. And I'm waking up 5:30, 3, 4, 5 mornings a week before school, going out riding in the rain. And this is, the batteries and things. You'd buy a pack of Seaside batteries, which is sort of like my spending money for the week, and they'd go flat in like the second day. Things like this. The equipment and things were so bad. I had no clothes to stay warm, and everything was wet. And I'd go out and come back, and I'd ride my wet, muddy bike to school that morning. I'd get wet again, sitting in class, still wet, and fall asleep in the afternoon in class because I'd ridden the King Lake or something before school. But that's really how it all started for me.
Like even things, I've heard these stories, and it's a road that I know well. It's a herd road. It's a roller coaster road that runs parallel next to Yan Yan. You had to get to a place called Eltham. You went to school in Eltham, and you didn't just choose the easy route. You chose this absolute hell road. It's like, it's 20% up and down, up and down. Of course you chose the hardest route, but Eltham College, I understood there was High School. Eltham High School. There was an influential person there, your PE teacher, or you had some good guidance along the way. Some guys from the bike shop, I think, as well. Russell Collette and Damien Grundy, who eventually was your coach. These guys were really influential, and like exactly what you said, it's something that happened to me too in the bunch rides. Is that there wasn't the internet, and you reached out and you learnt from elders and people that you met in bunch rides and people that you just could get a bit of knowledge from, and you took that on board. And I feel like it is really something that, for good and for bad, you can get any information off the internet now. But for me, growing up, I did the same thing. I'd go down to Bundoora Bunch and ride with all these different elders and understand. I didn't know if they were champions or not. I just listened to what they had to say. And it's only now I look back and think, oh, these guys are really good riders, and they gave me so much of my time. What was it like with those guys? And, I think you alluded to a couple of them just before. These guys, they were rubbing off on you, and that's where it sort of came from for you to keep following that dream, that possibility. I could be a pro here.
Yeah, everyone thought I was an idiot for even thinking that I could make it as a professional in those times. The first people, I think Kieran Ryan was the rider who was associated with the bike shop in Montmorency, who had the coaching experience. And because it was about a year after my first race in Blue Lake that I signed up to go to the national championships, mountain bike nationals in Thredbo.
Right.
And before that, talking to him, and he gave me some advice on, loading and peaking, and I'll do this and I'll do that. And okay. And I went there and I was like second at the nationals, and no one knew who I was or anything. And in the cross country sub junior, like under 16, and I was like, oh, who's this guy? And, but I'm like, oh, wow, this is working. And from there, that's where I think Damien Grundy saw me. And it was sort of something where that was a pure chance thing, and half my luck that they would open a bike shop around the corner from my high school, Eltham High School. And he opened a shop there. And so I was starting to talk to him, and he saw me racing. And then it's like, oh, yeah, maybe I'd like to start coaching and things like that. And I said, oh, I'd want to do this. And I want to do the national series and maybe try and go to the world championships one day. Would you be interested in coaching me? Coaching me? First he was, oh, I don't know. But then we started working till he sort of accepted, and I started training and then having contacts and just good support from the industry and things. And just like Apollo Bicycles back then, they had this, what was for the time really quite professional organisation, supplied me with equipment, which I was like single parent family, or we didn't have, I had the most basic equipment and the worst clothing and so on. Just to be able to get a bike at a reduced fee. Well, at least I had a bike then that was actually competitive, as opposed to something that I look back at it now, and I look back at like Peter Grock's story and things where you when you start on the really bad equipment, then you make it to the top on the bad equipment, and then you get the good stuff. They're the ones who really become the really good ones. And so I look back at those things, and having to perform on really poor equipment was actually at the time it was miserable, but then I look back and I think the lessons that taught me. But then that just opened the doors, and then mountain biking was accepted into the Olympics. So the national team started the AIS. Damien Grundy was appointed the coach there, and he was sort of, I suppose, my main influence. But along the way, I had made some good friends. Russell Collard, who you mentioned, who was sort of one of the first sort of elite level riders who I got to start riding with often. And another one, the first guy, Craig McLean, who I'm still in regular contact today. He was a guy, he was sort of top 10 at national level in downhill and cross country then. But he was the first one. I was like, oh, this guy's a mountain biker. Wow, he went to the nationals. Oh, for me as a junior, this is like, oh, wow. I just ask him questions. He's like, no. What's with the questions? But it was like I was just this sponge for information. I just want to be better. And
where do you think this like competitive sort of, well, not competitive, but this real drive, this sort of, because I feel like I've got it myself. This independence, this ability, emotional sort of strength. You're young, you're willing to go out and do these things. You talk about these rides in the morning. No one's forcing you to go out and do that. Go right up King Lake in the wet. You're a 16-year-old, boy. There's many other things on the horizon. Parties are happening, drinking's around the corner, and, getting your license, all this sort of stuff. Of course, I went through it myself, and for some reason, I just wasn't deterred. I really knew what I wanted at that point. I didn't know about if I was going to make it or not, but it was ingrained in me. Is it something that you remember, or is it just always sort of been with you? Were there different people?
No, I was really doing it all on my own, and there was something inside of me. Because I had this thing, like I said, I was reading the magazines, like, what, you can make as a professional like this? I'm like, hang on a second, whatever, how much training? Oh, okay, I just got to train a lot. Oh, is that all? Okay. That just was in my head, and that's all I wanted in life. If I go by what my mother says, she says no matter what it was, even when I was a little kid, if I took something, I was just crazy about it. It's like Lego or collecting cars or, I don't know, building a sandcastle. I took it, and she said this about me as a child, and then when I took this, I was like, this is what I want to do in life. And I find that, between parties and drinking and all these things, I was like, no, I'm not going out to party with friends. No, I'm not doing this. I got a race. I'm meeting the group to go for a ride at 6 o'clock in the morning or something. And so I skipped that whole teenage thing, which I'm really grateful for, because after you retire from racing, you have plenty of time to do that. and you're a little bit wiser about it as well and don't get in so much trouble. There was just this thing inside me that I just sort of, that cycling, I suppose, discovered for me. It wasn't like I was a competitive in sport. No, I was like the what's that film, Alex Prefontaine, is it? The guy who gets the runner who the more he was left on the bench, the more motivated he become. And then when he finally found his sport and his talent thing, because he was small and endurance and going to school in America, so American rules football wasn't for him. I was a bit the same. I turned up living in New South Wales. I didn't even know how to play what was then VFL, and being small and being endurance.
Just didn't fit.
I'll just sit on the sideline and watch, because who wants me on their team? But it was a little bit that as well, I think. So
it's a great thing about cycling, and it's happened to me too. I was playing rugby league, and I felt like in my team, at that age, a lot of other players had to play sport, or it was a school sport. And then when I found cycling, it was a sport. The more I put in, the more I got back. And I love that. That was what attracted me to it. It was, I was very competitive, but also it just exactly what you said. The reward you got from training and the dedication you put into it as a young sort of teenager, you could see this. I was like, I wanted more of it. Tell me a little bit about your first sort of people that you were hanging out with, especially out here in the Northern Combine. This is a racing sort of the road now I'm talking about. Your first sort of experience on the road. You came out and raced with a few legends, actually, not necessarily in sport, but who have gone on to do amazing things in their life. There's a guy called Michael O'Keefe. He's the founder of an amazing brand called Aesop,
which just got sold for 4.5 billion to L'Oreal last week. Yeah,
exactly. And then you've got a guy called Matt Keenan, who we both know is an amazing commentator of the Tour de France. There's a good guy called Graham Carlson, who raced over in Europe as well, who was mechanicking your car. Looking coincidentally, when I did a week of work experience, I was there working on this Mustang, and he said to me, "Mate, you know whose car you're looking after there?" I was like, "Oh no idea." Cadel Evans. And I couldn't believe it. I sort of love that this is all sort of in sync of where I grew up in cycling. And these guys, these people that you're sort of rubbing shoulders with, went on to do amazing things. And I feel like just this sort of group that you were around, with yourself included, it was just a nice little small bubble that, early life experiences and challenges along the way. How did that sort of prepare you think, later in your career?
Now, when all these connections that come together and the people who went to Europe and those names you mentioned, they're sort of like, I suppose when in my Tour de France career, they're not people who would come to immediately mind. Who is your first coach? Who's your current coach? What team are you with? Or whatever. That's the obvious things. These influences, like exactly the riders that you meet with, like an inspiration for me when I was young, Peter Basenko. I remember racing out at what was then called VFL Park.
What's he better known as?
Bulldog Basenko. But he was like, I remember yelling at me when out there, I was doing turns or something, we were trying to bridge across to the break or something. You'll be a bike rider one day, son. You'll be a bike rider. I was like, well, if he says so, I hope so. And he was just like this hard man of hard men, but for me that was an inspiration. And then meeting also Matt Keenan in younger days, and he was interesting because he sort of had a bit more idea of like the higher levels in cycling and going over to be a professional, and he knew a lot of people who'd gone to Europe and raced and tried to make it. So but I think he'd been talking a lot to Damien and probably Russell Collett, who knew more about me, so he knew a lot about me and sort of had a good idea of what my early ambitions were and where I wanted to go, and because I also at that time like to have these ambitions to become junior world champion or make us a professional, but people just laughed at you because it was ridiculous. And sort of like, I don't know, some little kid who comes up, I'm going to win the Formula One day. You're like, oh,
yeah, good on you,
nice,
mate.
son.
Yeah.
And that's where it really started. But it's funny, this link of people, because some had been to Europe, so there was quite a lot of experience and they were good people. But I think also just the weather in Melbourne, what I find was one of the early things. It was so variable and unpredictable, and that sort of helped as well. It wasn't like we never had cyclocross races in Australia, but if you go back to the 90s and speak to anyone who raced in club races in Chum Creek mountain bike, and they're like, why do we need cyclocross? We were just running with a bikes on our shoulders for half the course because it was just this slickest mud fest. But then I come to Europe and it's like, oh, mud? What? The bike doesn't get traction for like half a lap? That's okay. It's got suspension, it's got tyres, it's got disc brakes. This is easy. After doing all the Chum Creek experience on really modest equipment and so on. We'll look back now on those links at how it all came together. It really... I go back and I remember the first time I rode back after I stopped riding, and I rode up the Hume climb, which to me was always one of my favourite climbs. And for me, it was a real, to speak with our area there, I rode up there and I was thinking, shit, I remember riding up there for the first time, and I was this young kid who had big dreams, and I had this idea what I wanted to do. I want to be a pro mountain biker. I wanted to ride the Tour de France and all this. Anyway, I go back and ride there. I think it was my last year before my last races in 2014, 2015 off-season, getting ready for my last races in my career. I was thinking, all those dreams I had, and I was like, tick, 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 tick. Oh, shit, missing one there. But it was really like, right, I was riding up that climb, and there's no cars, there's boys running between those big ferns that sweep over the road, and it's just fantastic. But also it's kind of meditative and therapeutic, even though I was actually out training. But I come back and I look at it and I think, shit, what a great school. It wasn't easy, but it conditioned me well for what was to come, because I wouldn't say being pros, maybe the races I won looked easy, but of course my career, I had some great opportunities, but I had some pretty tough moments. There was always just that innate desire, hunger to be better, to do more, to be the best I could. And that really drove me right to the very last day, to my last race.
Well, I sort of wanted to set up that whole beginning because I think it's something that gets overlooked by a lot of young juniors, especially coming out of Australia these days. They want the shortcut to the top. They see a lot of guys who can travel very easily to Europe and set up in Girona or in Nice or whatever and live the pro life before they sort of are pro. And the reason why I wanted to speak to you about that beginning is because it is all about networking and doing, the hard times and this sort of thing and just sort of really growing up in the sport. I think it's something that's really missed now, and I really wanted to talk to you about that. It's something I experienced myself, and I feel like it is somewhat of a dying art. What I really want to jump to now is this special nickname that I found out about you that I can't believe that's slipped by, but I don't know if anyone refers to you as it anymore, is the lung.
Well, this is
the lung.
I never got called that myself, but
I love this name.
When I first went to it was the selection camp for the national team or something in 1994, and we were all doing the physiology testing, and I don't know if it was there or it was a bit later in my career, but I think, because for a while at the AIS, it was the highest VO2 max ever tested. But that was also when I was a mountain biker, because to be a road rider, you also need a bit more muscle to time trial and things. So watts per kilogram actually compromised for that. Sounds crazy to win the Tour de France, watts per kilogram. It's changed a little bit on that, but anyway. But it was when I was a mountain biker that this was in the 90s and started from there. But it's nothing anyone ever called to my face. But I don't know, maybe people call me a lot of things behind my back, but with a name like Cadel, I only get called Cadel because it's not like I get mixed up with all the other Chris's, Matthews or Jasons or Simons or something.
I think it's a brilliant name because it says to what you did become and what you sort of need to. And it's something I think, and I want to continually sort of touch base with you about this, is it's your mind is about the sport is one of the best assets from you, only just sort of understanding a little bit about you. I don't know this for sure, but clearly to be a Tour de France rider, GC rider, you need to have the physical capabilities too, and more so than a classics rider, than a sprinter. You need to have that big VO2 max, and I think you did have that, from what I understand, that ability, a huge oxygen sort of intake and ability to sort of distribute that over the body. I don't know where that sits with everyone else, but that was sort of the foundation, but that is only one part of the puzzle. And as we sort of discussed before, there is the second part, which is the mentality, and something that you continually had to work out. You started from a young age with it, but you had to continually work this out. The training is something you can control and get help with, but the psychological stuff, yeah, of course you can get help with that, but it's something you've got to continually work out and manage yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think, I go think back to my first Grand Tour I did in 2002, and people were like, how do you ride the Tour de France, all the distance and this? And I was like, your legs are tired, but your head, your brain is exhausted. I remember I think it was day 12 of my first Giro d'Italia that I rode, my first Grand Tour, and I'm riding back to my hotel, and I get back to the room, and I'm like, what room number was I in? And I'm walking around the whole corridor thinking, what damn room? I can't remember I was in 312 yesterday, but I'm in 412 today. I don't know, we changed hotels. But I just came to this realization. I'm like, I'm really exhausted. I can't even I went over there, I went back and forgot what room I was in. But it just made me realize how exhausted mentally you become. And of course, in your first Grand Tour, everything's new and different, and you have to get used to it, so you'll expend more energy mentally, and that's with experience. And where cycling is kind of particular in a sport where obviously inevitably, as much as I don't want to admit it, you do have a physical decline as you age, but in cycling, experience and the ability to be more efficient, whether it's with your legs, with your head, when to concentrate, when you can afford to relax, having that judgment to be able to do that and avoid crashes can compensate for a lot and helps compensate that decline in physical ability. Cycling in 2023 is changing that, but anyway, because they're just riding flat out all the time. Yeah. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Thanks for touching on my background in Bamili, Barunga and so on, because when I came into the European peloton, I was told, you have to do this, you have to do that, you're a GC rider, you should do this. And I was like, hang on a second. I was born in Bamili in the Northern Territory. I grew up doing this. I was a mountain biker, then I switched to the road, and now I come to be a GC rider. I'm not this run-of-the-mill fabricated rider who came through the French club teams or the Belgian club teams or the Italian club teams where they have people looking after and telling them what they should eat, how they should think, how they should train. I had to go and learn all this on myself. But no, I'm not saying that one is better or worse than the other, but I'm just like, hang on, you're taking this guy, I'm not a Martian, but you're taking this sort of complete foreigner and you're trying to mold him to put him into here. It's just, hang on a second, let's just see what works. Because just as I suppose the whole mentality and thing, my mentality was very different. Having said that, when I came to be as a GC rider as the road, and especially crossing over from mountain biking initially, 2001, 2002 to the road, the mentality in mountain bike and road were very, very different. And already, obviously, road cycling being a team sport most of the time, mountain biking being nearly exclusively an individual sport, already there you have a big change. But you know that going into it, okay, I'm part of a team, my job in the team is to do this and that. The mentality for me that was difficult to adjust sometimes is like, oh, the team's doing this. That's completely stupid. This is so much better to do, but the whole team's doing this. Oh, okay, so you
have to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to go and do that even if it's completely stupid. What happened though was the road changed and changed and changed to become more like mountain bike. Mountain biking prepared me okay for when I crossed over. It prepared me really well for the change. Roman road cycling made its big changes, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. There I was just in my element.
What about those years before then? And like, look, I looked at it and you were a bit of an awakening for me when I saw you in that Mapei kit, especially when you're in that pink Mapei kit. For me, it became like, whoa, we can ride GC, Australian riders, and it inspired me even more to go try and become a professional. Not a GC man, but just for something aesthetically, looking at you in that kit, trying to win the Giro as a young rider. I wanted to become part of that club. But what was it like for you being, because I can imagine being an outsider and not falling into the traps of, hey, I better just fit into the mold here. I better just have an espresso at night, even though I know that's going to keep me up. I better just train with the group, even though I know I don't want to do that. For so long, you held out and went, I know what I need to do.
No, I suppose that real, you could say a stubborn, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do to get to where I want to go, and I'm going to do that. And so I was the guy who doesn't fit in, and often the journalists and things, he doesn't fit in, he's strange, he goes and does his own thing. Funnily enough, the whole world of cycling changed and does
exactly what
I was doing there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, hang on, I don't fit in, or I was ahead of my time, or you were behind the times, or anyway. And that's not for me to make an opinion on. I just had this thing in my head, and I was fixed on this, and that was what I was going to do. And like I had this approach, and I had a bit of a Damien for all the great things we had at a certain period. It's like, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. We do it like this, or I'll find someone else to help me. But I was like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And it was that moment that I really took on everything that I was doing. I was training hard, and that, okay, no, just everything I can do in my life to be committed to it. And 8 o'clock finish eating a meal, go to bed, and all this every hour of my day just dedicated to the sport. But this was like at a young age when not many people were looking to these details. Now I think everyone in the World Tour Peloton is probably doing exactly this.
One guy who I think was ahead of his time was Aldo Sass. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with him and why you guys actually connected really well.
So Aldo Sassi for me was what gave me the whole opportunity to go to the road, and I'll say us as Australians, all those results, Grand Tour results, World Championships and all that. If it wasn't for him, maybe I would have come close or got there in another path, but the way that we worked together was he was the most influential person single-handedly in my road career. Long story short, he was a guy who I think was about 10 years ahead of his time. So same thing, he didn't fit in with what other coaches were doing, what cycling was doing at the time. He passed away in November of 2010. He got it was a really quick turnaround thing. I think I rang him, I was at Tirreno Adriatico in 2010. I called him in the office, sorry, I got a headache. And then next day I called, he's not here. And then, so this was like March 2010, November. He was no more. This is one of the most incredible minds I've ever met in my life, and just gone like that. What he set up, what he had the opportunity with Dr. Squinzi and Mapei Sport to set up, and the research that they did, they were just 10 years ahead of their time. That still carries on today. He had an understudy in Andrea Morelli, who was the biomechanist at Mapei, who took on his Aldo's main riders, me included. And now he made some subtle changes to Aldo's training and a little bit less volume, not absolutely exhausted, but a little bit sharper, more specific training, more specific intervals. And that was 2011 where I just had this string of results, which was one of my best year ever. But that carried on from there. In summary, Aldo was single most influential person in my career. And he was a guy who was 10 years ahead of his time. He saw me racing. He'd been following me. I found out later. Mape had been following me since about 1996 and watching me. And he came to me, it was the night before the Worlds in Portugal, 2001, my first Pro Worlds, and came to me and said, would you like to come to our team and develop as a Grand Tour rider? Yes. I was like 24 years old. Do you have a contract? Yes. Can you get out of it? Maybe. And because I had a contract with mountain bikes and things, but there was all this infighting within the team and things, and it wasn't. I like
you're on Seiko. You're on Seiko.
Volvo Cannondale mountain bike.
Oh, right.
And I was racing a bit with Seiko. And but there was all these problems going in the team, and I wasn't enjoying going to the races anymore. So I was sort of like, oh, hang on, here's some people who really want to work with me. And I was quite elitist in my approach. It's like, okay, what do I need to do to be better and be the best? And no, hang out, be friends. No, we need this to win. And I think one thing I see also, us as Australians, we go over, and I was coming over 5, 6, 10 months a year at a time. I think a lot of the Europeans, you can tell them 10 times, but they don't understand that. It's like you go away from home for 10 months a year at a time. I had this thing. My mum would always take me to the airport. My mum, 46 years old. My mum, she still comes and picks me up from the airport. Hi, Mum. Well, she drops me off at the airport because I'm not going to see her. See you, Mum. See you in October. And it's still the same thing. But I know it's this thing that I'd be leaving in January. I'll see you, Mum. See you in October. It was this thing, and it's still the same today. So for me, I was making all these sacrifices to be over there. I wasn't going to cut myself short by like not training as good as I could or not being meticulous with my equipment to be let down, especially mountain biking.
For me, when you left Mape and you went to T-Mobile, I was a young guy who was watching that rivalry between Ulrich and Armstrong, and I was a big T-Mobile fan. I thought, wow, this is it. We've got him, Cadel. He's going to be in my eyes, the squad, the awesome squad. But they didn't race you any Grand Tours. You quickly made the shift to Lotto, and that's where your big sort of Tour de France campaign started. And you started really well there in your first Grand Tour. Finished 8th in your first Tour de France. Finished 8th in your first tour, 4th and 2 seconds there as well. Tell me a little bit of that Lotto period. And I know things changed towards the end, but when you first went across to Lotto after T-Mobile, you were sort of, okay, this is it. I've got this team behind me. They had the belief in you. Was that the feeling?
In T-Mobile, I was quickly relegated to the B team, so I didn't get to do any of the big races that I wanted to. Contrast to that, after 2 years of no results, not many teams were interested in me. I think in a big part, probably Robbie McEwen behind the scenes was saying good things about me. That Lotto had belief in me, and all of a sudden I went from not being able to do any races that I wanted to do to all of a sudden doing too many. But for me, I just want an opportunity to be in the big races again and race at the front. That was my main thing. So I trained, went there. There was we've gotten a break with Robbie at the national championships, and I towed him to the line, so we win that. Okay, hopefully you got some belief in me as a teammate. Now I'll go away and start doing all that and doing these other races, and then all of a sudden it was a time when just on this points accumulation, and all of a sudden we take Cadel to every hilly stage race and he can finish in the top 10 and get points. So all of a sudden I'm going to every hilly stage race and to get points. And I'm like, now we're going to the Tour. Now we have to get a big result. I'm doing like GC from Ruta del Sol to Paris-Nice, where it was between Paris-Nice. So I got a bit of respite there because I only went for the win in the Ardennes, and then a little bit of a rest, and then Romandy, and then a little bit of rest, and then training camps, Dauphiné, Tour, and then, hey, come do the Vuelta or whatever. Anyway, so I just went to doing all these races, but as my results at the Tour were getting better, they sort of had a bit of faith in me. Well, you can do a few less races to get the result better in the Tour, but then the second year, 2008, getting second at the Tour 2 years in a row, then the team lost complete faith in me, and it was over.
And those 2 seconds, and I could be wrong here, are in the top 10 closest second places, I think, in all time, or some crazy statistic like that.
Yeah, it's like number 3 and number 5 or something.
They lost faith in you, but did you lose faith in them? Like, how was the relationship there, and how are you feeling at this point? Because you're so close. Like, it's not like I know second is second, but there were other things that were in that. There were injuries that people didn't know about. It wasn't just rolling in second and, coming from third to get second. It was just missing out and the team losing faith in you. And where was your head at those times in, 7 and 8?
Yeah, especially like you touched on the 2008, I had like in my mind, and Aldo Sassi goes and does his numbers and, that crash cost you 5%. In my mind, I had the legs to get 6th, maybe 4th. And then I was like fighting for the win to the end. I'm like, that was actually a really good result. But me knowing how I raced. My thing was I had to race. So because I didn't have a team that could defend yellow, I had to race behind to come back. But you have to understand when you're going, like they're split in the crosswind with Saxo Bank the year that Sustre won. There's 10 guys in front or something, 13 guys in front, 4 Saxo Bank and me solo. If I puncture, boom, GC's over for me for the whole tour. I'm on my own. I was like going against these guys and Contador and US Postal Service. And because the year before, like everyone's, can you beat Contador? Can you beat Contador? I remember driving to the start and I'm like, director, hey, keep time checks on Leipheimer because he could come back on me as well. But I'm in this sandwich of US Postal Service guys who have, they've got this experience of riding the Tour de France like no other team. And, but I just had to, I had to time my run like I did in 2011. I just had to be there and wait. In 2011, we had a team to defend yellow, but not in the mountains. So then when you're going against 2 Schleck brothers on their own, because they're teammates, they could play off each other. And being brothers, it makes it a bit, it's not like one's going to be selfish and if he's going to lose, make the other one lose, right? It's a different relationship there. But that's just the way I had to race. And, I just came up a little bit short. But, of course, in my thinking was in percentage terms, 23 seconds over 85 hours of racing, that's pretty close. I'll keep working on this. I'll keep working on this because I've still got a lot more left in the tank and a lot more desire. And I feel like I haven't quite given it everything yet, and I'm not giving up till I have given it everything. And then 2010 for me was 2009. The team had lost complete faith in me. It was just, I went through the motions through it, but I remember November, December before that year, and just like, this got no chance. The way the miscommunications in the team and things were going, and it was really from the time trial against Sustre, the team there just towards me just completely changed. The attitude towards me completely changed. And 2010 was I rode into yellow, but I broke my elbow that day. For me, that was one of the, do I have regrets for my career? I'm like, shit, that stupid little crash. I stopped to go to the toilet at the start of the stage. I come back to the Peloton. I think the same thing. Someone passed on the inside, rode in some gravel, took me out from behind. I'm like,
and this is now with BMC, isn't it?
Yeah, this was in BMC, and in that period, like having seen that the team had lost faith in me, and my manager for my whole road career was Tony Rominger, and it was he who came to me and said, "Look, you can go through with this contract, but if you want to win the tour, you're going to have to change teams. There's this team that's on the rise. There's this guy, Andy Reese, who believes in this. He's got a long term." And I was like, "That's a good idea." And
but it wasn't a world tour. Well, what it was called back then, it wasn't a pro tour team. Like, how were you able to make that decision in your own mind? Like, okay, I'm going to take a step down. I don't even know if this team's going to be in the tour. Like, they're big decisions.
Yeah. Well, one thing I needed, and this was a meeting I had with the team manager, and it was actually the meeting was the day before the World Championships in 2009, which no one would normally do that, but I just. I sat down with Jim Ockowicz. I'd heard a lot about him. I'd read a lot about him, all the years reading all the American cycling magazines and things. And he just asked me questions and this, and we hear this about you and this, and it's all these things I don't fit in and a bit particular. And so I'm like, well, tell me what? Well, here, this is why I did this. This is why I did this. This is why I did this. This is why. No, right. This is my situation. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, all you need is someone who has faith in you. All you need is a team that has confidence in you. That's all I want.
Yeah, that's all I want.
That's all I want. And of course, I went back and like I was doing this because they were setting up the Orica team at this time, so I couldn't say anything to anyone, and I had a contract and things. And anyway, I went back, and anyway, I got up the next morning, and a handbrake had been let off. Got on my bike, and it was the World Championships in Mendrisio, and I rode off and got a rainbow jersey. Aldo Sassi was there after the finish line with Dr. Squinzy, and we had a little cry together behind the finish line in secret, and that was the start of the next part of my career.
Well, before we skip on from that, there's a mutual friend of ours, Simon Clark. I remember he's told me this story. I haven't got a chance to speak to him about it again. I wanted to touch up on it again. But that night before you rode the World Championships, I think you were rooming with Simon. Simon's...
Yeah. Simon and I roomed together, yeah.
Yeah, and he was a young guy then. And from what I understand, even the Australian team at that point, you just coming out of the Vuelta, you just finished podium on the Vuelta of España, you're in good form and coming to literally a home World Championships for you. You knew those roads by the back of your hand. Your house was only a few kilometres from the course.
I'm 3 kilometres away from the finish line now.
There we go. Right. And so from what I understand too, even your own country, your own Australian team still weren't showing you that sort of faith you were looking for.
Yeah, well, I suppose by this time, thanks to all these people's lack of faith in me, I was pretty well conditioned to it and I knew how to deal with it. And I was like, oh, well, Simon, if you can do this and this for me, I think we can do something here. And he had faith in me. He got me my feed bags. He hung with me for as long as he could. So basically, like teams early, Michael Rogers riding, being the break, and that all worked in my favour in the end because that was for the good of the team. But in the end, it was, I went there and Simon and I won that Worlds. Yeah, sorry, no disrespect, but I don't need to tell the other guys on the team that, thanks to that. And it's funny that Simon, I knew of him before. And it's funny, we were both from Melbourne and I didn't know how similar paths we'd taken to get to cycling. He was track and road I was mountain bike and road coming to where we are today. But we came together and he had a real tough run at the start of his career. And so when he came through with the Tour with the win last year, knowing what he'd been through, I saw that and I really felt for him. But I think he sort of probably saw in me
a lot of himself.
What he'd been through. We saw in each other what we'd been through and having followed similar pathways. And Simon's thing was he was sort of like, he said to me afterwards, I knew you were going to be up because you were on the rise because you had a better result in the second time trial in the Vuelta than the first time trial. Whereas normally my best, it's sort of I didn't even think of that. It's like, oh yeah, that's probably a good indicator, isn't it? But anyway, concentrated on the thing at hand, in the details in front of you as you are as a bike rider. Fortunately, he had there to do what he had to do, and then I could play the part in the last bit. And for me, it was also after the Vuelta where I punched it on the second last climb. The TV motorbike stopped in the middle of the road to film me getting a wheel change. It was the change between 11 and 12 speed. The neutral service was there. But the thing was the TV motorbike stopped in the middle of the road and no cars could pass. So it blocked all the team cars, so I had no assistance. I lost, I think it was a minute 36 or something to Alessandro Valverde, who maybe shouldn't have been racing in that period. And then I was third at like a minute 26 or something. And I was just like, I was going back to what we were speaking about before. It's like, I put everything in this sport, and the fact that I get beaten by someone who maybe shouldn't have even been racing in that period, allowed to race in that period was, for me, that was one of the few times cycling for me really spat in my face. Anyway, to touch on this, I was like, oh, I'll try again. And things went my way the following week in Mendrisio, and the sort of the Spanish guys who they were my point of reference for the final there. They sort of cancelled each other out in the end, and things went my way. But also there, it's just a little bit there with Kolobnev and Rodriguez. We're 3 away, and I think Kolobnev's there. Rodriguez is like, the Cadel will open a gap, and one looks at the other to close the gap. That gap becomes a bigger gap, and I'm like, I wouldn't be doing this if I were you boys, and off I went. I think there it's just luck. What decision do they take? If Rodriguez had done one surge and Kolobnev had come, and maybe it would have been a whole different result. I don't know.
I don't believe so. I've recently just watched that, and I think those guys had no chance. You were just out of the seat the whole way up that climb, and those two guys hanging by grim death there. That was an attack that no one was going to be able to cover. It was the start of a new era for you. I guess the final era at BMC. Like you said, it was a breath of fresh air, some faith behind you. And look, you really did start well. And when we think about the Giro, an iconic Giro stage, it was almost the Strada Bianca stage where you fought out with Vinokurov, a personal favourite of mine. We got to see the muddy, the gruesomeness of it. You had some other great results there with the team, but what was it like, that feeling, being in the squad and feeling that faith that first year, and like, okay, this is actually true what he said in the meeting. They do believe in me.
Yeah, it was a little bit that. It was funny because we came out, we didn't know what races we could go in because we were continental. So, we can do we've got to start in Tour Down Under. Oh, great. Oh, come out, George, and the guys are coming out to Tour Down Under. Lance was out there that year as well, actually. And anyway, I was sitting down at one of the first stages of Tour Down Under. It was one of the first races, new team and everything. Oh, cool. And we're sitting there and I was just like, shit, there's something different here. What is it? It's like, people are happy to be here. Now in the footy they speak about the culture. It's like, I can't believe what cloud of negativity groups, teams, businesses can get into. And once they're in it, they don't even realize they're in this cloud of negativity. Because this moment where, funnily enough, we were sitting outside and the sun putting on the sunscreen or something to do, I was like, everyone's just happy to be here. And why wouldn't you be? We're pros at a bike race, the sun's shining, and we've got an opportunity to race. And that was my first thing. And that was a little bit one of those little moments of like, I've been living out in this under this cloud. It's been following me wherever I go. That was the first thing. And then it was just a bit hard to after that, the equipment and things and the whole mentality of the team is, and Andy Reese is, I don't want ever a rider to have a problem with equipment. I want to provide the best material. And then I was like, this is perfect. Strada Bianca stage reconnaissance, and I rode the last corner of the climb 6 times or whatever, and they're like, what the hell are you doing here? It's like for the finish to Strada Bianca and all the tyre choices and the bike change and all this, and it was just like me being a mountain biker and on a stage for a Grand Tour. And then it was Fabio Baldato, which is interesting, was my director then, and I remember like I went back and rode like the finish like 5 times, and the other guys had gone back to the coffee shop and they're having a coffee out in the sun. They come back and he sort of laughed at me. Do you know the last corner yet? And he sort of laughed at me and he said it in a sort of condescending manner. And then of course we come into the race and it's pouring rain and muddy, and I'm coming into the last corner and I had Vinokurov and Koenig on the winner, and I've led into the village centre, if I remember correctly. I've taken the lead on the downhill and I've led in, which you would never do, of course. You don't lead a K to go for when you've got 2 guys on the wheel, right? And it's like, I'm going through the cobbled town centre. I'm like, if you boys can follow me through this last corner, you deserve to win. Because I knew the last corner and no one could follow me, and I just rolled up to the finish line and won the stage. Baldato was the director of Pog and Flanders this race. Yeah. And it was sort of funny because I was watching Pog and I'm like, no one would do this. Damn, I bet Baldato's in the car. And sure enough, they showed the images and the things. I was sending a message to Fabio it's those little things, but it's that mountain biking. What mountain biking taught me 20 years earlier was just perfect for that. And I have to say, particularly that stage of all, it's all muddy and people couldn't see, and that number's like, when your glasses get like that, you put them down here and then you squirt them with water, and then the front derailleur gets a bit sticky, you squirt some water on there, you get another bottle, or you squirt some water in the chain, clean it up a bit, you ride big so your chain doesn't, because if it gets full of mud it can skip on the gears, and just the little things like this. For me it was just second nature. But even the mountain bikers, they don't need to do this today with the material so good now, but back in the 90s you had to do all these things racing in Chum Creek. And but anyway, that's sort of my thing, where the mountain biking prepared me so well.
We're now seeing a lot more gravel introduced into the road races that we once raced, the Grand Tours and other races, but also that first, I don't know exactly, but I want to say it's one of the first, if not the first, that gravel stage that you did do in the 2010 Giro, the Strada Bianchi stage. What was the opinion of the riders when that was presented in the, of course you've got the Col de Finestra, but never really a race where you were descending on gravel roads, and the Strada Bianchi is another kettle of fish. Opposed to riding up gravel climbs. I'm talking about racing on gravel roads. What was that like in the early days? I know it's only 10 years ago or just a bit more. Yeah, but I can imagine it wasn't really accepted as much as today.
I think it was about 2005 was the first edition of Strada Bianca. Me as a rider, I'm going to do that race because I know it's this old epic how racing was years ago. But I think it's the acceptance of riding on dirt roads. But most of all, it's the TV interest is just spectacular, because like the interest of Paris-Roubaix, if it didn't have cobbles, it wouldn't be quite such an interesting race. No offence to the cobbles or Paris-Roubaix, but
it wouldn't have
cobbles.
It'd just be another
realistic about
just be another race.
It'd be a Paris-Bruxelles or Paris Tour, or Paris Tour has gravel in it as well now. But it's the TV interest is so great that it's a great spectacle. I want to have in the Great Ocean Road Race gravel as well, but people travel from so far away and they come down there and they get there and they puncture there, and maybe they're out of the race because they punctured on the gravel or something. It's a little bit, some people involved in the race don't want that. But it's a great spectacle. I think it's a healthy, I suppose, evolution of the sport, because if the sport goes the way that I fear it may, where we're all going to be riding gravel because there's just going to be too many cars everywhere, maybe we'll have self-driving cars that don't run over cyclists then. Or maybe it's worse, I don't know. But it seems it's possible it's going to go that way. And well, isn't this great because we can be like the pros? But we don't. it'll maybe become in 20 years' time, our children will go, oh, wow, I got to ride on the tarmac today, Dad. We went on an asphalt ride. Oh, it was really cool.
There were asphalt
sections. An asphalt section. Oh, we did 50k an hour. I had to pump up my tyres. I had to put 2-bar in them.
Let's get back on the road. Lastly, but definitely not leastly, is I want to talk to you about 2011, the Tour de France win. Very, very, what is even the right word? It was just amazing. It was beautiful. It happened. The first Australian winner, but for you, this long fight with the race, it clicked. It happened. The right team, the right support, the right form, everything came together for you. Let's talk about it a little bit. And I know you've spoken about it a lot, but things started off really well with that Triple T in the beginning. You know, a team, BMC, you know, I looked at the roster again to remind myself just the other day. You know, it was a great team. You had George there, you had Bogard, you know, even Santa Amita was a guy that I rode with. It was a strong team, but it wasn't a rock star team, but they just glued together. You might disagree with me, but I think it was just from the outside, it looked like a team, like you said, wanted to be there. They wanted to ride together. Was that the difference that took me through, one, the squad and the Tour de France, I guess, 211?
Yeah, and briefly it was, we weren't the strongest team on paper, certainly not in the mountains anyway, but we were strongly unified. And I think it was sort of we'd all come to this small team together, or a small team. We came out of the World Tour teams to come to this team that was building together, and that was sort of, I suppose, part of it. But I think that year, the year before, a sort of little regret of mine, I had bad luck in that, but I was really well positioned to do a good tour. Contador went on to win the Tour in 2010 on the cobbled stage. I think I took 2 minutes 30 on him or something. So I was really well positioned to have a good tour. So I was a bit like, and in the odds and things, I couldn't believe it, how quickly you get forgotten in the sport. But in my mind, I was like, I can win this. I don't need to have good luck. I just don't want to have any bad luck. And we had a really good run of events during that year where we were racing together, and we had wins together. And I think the more we rode together, the more we won together, the strengther we were unified, and the stronger we were believed in each other. And it wasn't like a team building thing with a psychologist or whatever. It was like, what I think really came down to was my mind, and the other guys would be able to answer this better, but I got the feeling that no one wanted to be the weak link in the chain. So everyone went and did everything they could to not be the weak link in the chain in that Tour de France team. And so everyone went and did their best. No one said anything. No one complained. We're just going to go and do our best and see what we can do. We didn't have any pressure. No one was expecting us to win or anything. But I think, you know, the first team meeting was like, I just go in. Look, I think if we do this and this, we can be on the podium. How well we do this and this determines what step of the podium we'll be on. And we just went through what we did. And we had issues and things in the race, but they were in the flat stages or something, bike changes and things, where I had guys like Bulgard and George who could stay calm, Bulgard who could ride on the flat in the wind all day, and Steve who could go uphill really good, like on the was it the Galibier the second time up, who was right there, who got me across back to the group, and that was our strength in unity, I think, that was really made us stronger, and then avoiding bad luck. The bad luck we had, we could look after, and just that was everyone saw it on TV and what happened there, and the whole Galibier stage and things like the famous one, the finish on Galibier. That for me was really in my mind, it was 2011. It was 20 years since my first bike race in Blue Lake in 1991 in Plenty, and everything I'd learned from that first race to that day, I had to put into action that day. But the main thing in that position is obviously being good, staying calm, being calculating, and but staying calm under somewhat a large amount of pressure, and that was the biggest thing it was the key to keeping things together on that day.
Tell us a little bit about the Galibier stage, if everyone doesn't know exactly what happened there, and how, because you were put in a situation where you just had to take control and set the tour up for yourself, essentially. Run us through what happened that day.
Yeah, well, basically, Stewie, actually, Grady and Frank and Andy had come up with this idea. The only way they're going to beat us, it's risky, is to go away and get to the foot of the Galibier well ahead. And what happened by doing that was they made the Izoard, the climb before, so difficult that we get to the bottom of the Izoard and nearly everyone was on their own, or anyone who had teammates, because Steve Marabido was there, I think, and he did like one turn and he was done. Uskatel had guys, they did like one turn each, they were all done. So we got into the valley of, what's it there, Briançon, up towards the Lothare and onto the Glibier, and there was only team leaders left. And so it wasn't that they were riding so fast, it was sort of they'd eliminated the people who could otherwise close that, what isn't a sizable gap, weren't there to do that, and no team leader's going to go and ride on the flat and compromise their GC to close the gap for someone else. So we found ourselves at the bottom of the climb, and Contador was actually one of the initiators. I think he was fifth on GC then, and it's like, do you want me to ride? Yeah, someone's got to start. And I think I started riding with him, and then I think it was not.
Was that a strange sensation? Just like two GC guys swapping off like you've been dropped out the back of the Peloton, something that I'd normally do?
Well, as a GC rider, you sort of never actually, one or two chances I've experienced being dropped in the Peloton to ride turns to come back. Yeah, it's kind of unusual. But yeah, Contador, do you want me to ride? And I'm like, oh, shit, yeah. But he started, and then I took on, and I think it was 6 or 9 Ks to go or something from the finish, and no one wanted to ride with me. And the only one, and this was a funny thing in that group, if you go back and look at it, maybe I had my race mind on, so I was. But the only one I saw who could ride was Vauclair had Pierre Roland with him. Yeah, but do you think Vauclair was going to help me win the Tour de France? No way. In my mind, he compromised his podium position by doing that. But, he doesn't want to help me win. You're king of the Tour now, you ride. Okay, get out of my way, folks, stop wasting my time. So he wasn't going to ride, so Pierre Roland sitting there had the legs to ride, but he got his rewards the next day. And so I just had to ride to the finish. And I think for me was, of course, I had to close to Andy, close the gap, but I had Frank Schleck on the wheel, who was third on GC. So it was kind of like, hang on, I've got to close as much as I can, but I've got to save something in reserve because he's going to start attacking me, right? Or I don't know. Is he going to attack? Is he going to kind of jump across to his brother? Is he stuffed? I don't know, but I had to keep something in reserve there. So it wasn't that I got to like 300 meters to go and he jumped away. I'm like, oh, okay, that's manageable. Now I can bury myself to close and just not lose any seconds and put myself in a hole kind of thing. But before that, I had to sort of ride within myself. If he started hitting me at 1K go, 2Ks to go, I had to have something in reserve to be able to cover those kinds of moves. So that was, it was 20 years of experience put into 9 kilometers of my career. It was all on TV and everyone could see it. It was probably among the best 9 kilometers I ever did on a bike in my life.
Well, you spoke about a couple of guys there. I want to ask you one of the questions just before we finish up talking about the tour, but your biggest sort of competitor when you talk about the GC guys, I would have said, maybe it was Contador, maybe it was the Schleck brothers, but I feel like you and the Schleckies had a bit of a mutual sort of respect. I could be completely wrong. And it sounds like there, Alberto, I don't know, maybe this is just a one-off. Maybe you guys didn't get on or maybe you did. I don't know. Who was sort of your biggest rival, and did you sort of put that stuff aside and they became just competitors in the moment, or what was it like up there, the mutual respect? I don't know what it'd be like for you guys.
Oh, there was certainly mutual respect within the racing, but so I could never have a friendly conversation with Contador until we'd both retired, and I saw him at the Giro presentation. I sat down and talked with him once, because until then we were always, in nearly every race we went to, we were against each other, whether it was Dauphiné or Pays Basque or Paris-Nice or Tour or whatever. We were always going head to head with each other, so we never had a friendly conversation ever. Whereas the Schlecks, we had more, much more mutual friendship. And I'd say like Frank and Andy, especially Frank, because he's pre-COVID, I'd often see him at different events, whether it was their ride that they have in their Grand Fondo or other events we'd cross paths at. Always saw him, we always catch up and have a beer together, and so that was a real friendship there. And you probably find this year when you retire, ones who maybe didn't get along with his riders, you become like great friends with afterwards. So in that regard, Contador was my hardest. He was the hardest man to beat. You had to be really good, you had to be really clever, and you had to be a little bit lucky as well, because he was when he was on, he was hard and mentally tough.
Really?
You think of this guy when he won on the stage on when he was in Astana, he won on the stage into Switzerland there in Valais there. So he was going to win the tour, but he was going back to get his own bottles from the car because Lance was on the team and there was infighting within the team. And so he was going back to, like, his mechanic, I think, was giving him bottles or something from the car. He wouldn't even take them from the Brunel and all this. You think to have this mentality and then go away and win the tour. He nearly dropped the TV motorbike on that finish, I remember. What was the stage there? Not Lenzerheide, that's on the other end. I can't remember this.
I can't think of it either.
Stage of Verbier.
Right.
I think it was
Yes.
Verbia, yeah, if I remember correctly. Go through the tunnel, take a left, get steep, right. I remember the climb, but I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, yeah, he was mentally really, really tough.
Talk me through the last time trial at the 2011 tour, and you need to take 2 minutes, I think, wasn't it? A minute, sorry, off Frank. Off Andy, and you being a much more superior time trialer. Rolling down that ramp, were you still feeling the pressure? I can imagine you were, but was it sort of a comfortable sort of pressure? I know that a lot of preparation went into this. I've heard about this preparation with Dauphiné and understanding that, Dauphiné had the same time trial that year before the race. Trek Leopard didn't decide to do, the two riders, Frank and Andy, didn't do Dauphiné for some unknown reason. You decided to do it because you wanted to recon the time trial.
Totally,
Tell me about this final time trial and what you were feeling rolling down with the potentially now you could control a situation because it was an individual time trial and rolling into Paris sort of, just after that.
Oh, I'd been in that situation before in 2007, 2008. And in both occasions, people thought I was going to win. Everyone was actually kind of convinced I was going to win. So I was sort of like, I wasn't taking it so, this is done kind of thing. We'd prepared everything really well. And this was a part of the thing, going to BMC and choosing the material and doing anything. I was allowed to do that. And they had a bike built specifically for me, and not exactly for that time trial, but so that if I came to this situation, I had to, everything was, I was the best equipped, or equivalent to the best equipped rider in the race.
What specifically did they have for that time trial? How did they change the time trial bike?
We had a time trial bike that fitted me. That was a big thing, as opposed.
That's good. That's handy.
Yeah. A bike that had custom made handlebars, and you were allowed to have them then. And I had a really good bike and wheels and everything that was the best of the best. Whereas in times gone by, you go into these time trials, and not that I was one to focus on it. I really tried to put it out of my mind. But when people come and tell you, oh yeah, you lose 1 second per kilometre with these wheels over that one or something, you're just like, God, it's a 40k time trial. I've got 2 minutes to make up. I don't want to know that I'm going to lose 40 seconds just for my front wheel or whatever. And we had the chance to choose everything, and that was my thing, to go to Dauphiné. I was surprised that the Schleck brothers didn't go there. This is a perfect opportunity to try anything, and I chose all the equipment, tyres, gearing, everything, and just knew what I wanted to do, and that was about getting on the start line and doing it. I did also see, I think Andy, in my mind, observations as that little mind game athlete thing, I saw with him that he didn't have a big enough gap on Alpe d'Huez and Galibier that he wanted, so he wasn't confident that he could hold it. So I saw that as well. So in me, that gave me a lot of confidence, thinking that, I think he feels he's already beaten, which makes it much easier going into a time trial. So that was the main part of it. And then the whole time trial, it was, it was a bit of flat, a bit of downhill, and a bit of climbing. And it was really all, my best time trials are the changing rhythm and variations, and that was really like that. And having done the reconnaissance and everything, I could make up time on the downhills and everything. I rode I was on the phone to him just the other day, the material guy, Stefano Catai, who's an ex-rider, and he was like, no, use this time trial tyre, a track tyre, you save maybe 40 kilometres or 30 seconds over 40 kilometres or something. It's like, no, put the road tyre because I know I'm going to take more than 40 seconds on this downhill if I've got that tyre. And so my God, so when you got a road tyre on the front, there was a big difference between Conti's then were they were real soft compound, it was real sticky, and now everyone's much closer in the tyre sector. But back then, Conti's,
I remember the tyre exactly. It was a very sticky tyre. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was a bit slow, but you could rail down the downhills like nothing else. So anyway, and that was one of the little things that I remember going back to it. But it all came together. But obviously, my main thing is, like, compared to the other two times, you go 2Ks down the road, 4Ks down the road, you're 20 seconds up, and you're like, here we go, how fast do we need to go? As opposed to, you're 10 seconds down, you're like, I've got to go faster. And but when your foot's
already on the limit,
floor,
yeah.
It's not like pushing on the accelerator hard is going to make it go any faster. So whereas this time it's just like, keep accelerating, it just keeps going. When you're in that, when you're in the win for yellow, that's a bit the difference.
I want to ask you about it because it would have been amazing. I'm a bit of a Tina Arena fan. Tina Arena rocks up to sing the national anthem at the podium. She lives in Paris. She's an Australian. Anyone doesn't know, she's an Australian singer. First time the national anthem ever gets sung at the podium at the Tour de France. Was it a surprise for you? What did you have anything to do with that? What's the connection between you guys?
No, until then, no. I have to say, from that moment on in my life took a change. So I was like, oh, Tina Arina's here to sing the national anthem. Hug me and kiss me. You were awesome, mate. And I was like, oh, yeah, whatever. I'm just following everything, and you're about to be on TV telecast. The images are going to be telecast around the world, probably still telecast sometimes now still. Look in front. Here's my hat on straight. Here's my jersey. These things. My life changed from that moment onwards for a long period. So I was sort of like, whatever. So this is how life is now. But it was funny. Years later, I got to present her with her Hall of Fame award.
Wow! I didn't know that.
Which that was amazing. That for me was amazing because they brought me on as a surprise, and I was a bit. Actually, I look back now. I was like, geez, I was such a fanboy. I was can I stand up straight? And because I was sitting with Kylie Minogue and Tina Arena standing there and it was live on TV, but it was the live awards that's unedited, not like the rest that they edit out, and that's all fake stuff that you see there, because you see some of the speeches that people make and you're just like, oh my god. But that's all. we were live direct, and so it was all raw, which is completely different. And but Kylie Minogue standing here, Tina Arena standing there, here I'm presenting this thing, and I was like, oh, this is a little bit too much for I can normally stay calm in those kinds of things, but that for me was one of these moments. I was like, oh, one of these things that happens in life. And that was the Tour de France. It goes beyond. It goes beyond cycling. It goes beyond sport, and that's why it's a showcase of it's the big stage of our sport.
I want to talk about the future, the current day. Lastly, before I let you go, there's only one other Australian who's won the Grand Tour, one that slipped away from you, the Giro d'Italia. I think it would have been one that you would have liked to have got as well. But I heard, a little birdie told me that you were actually down there to see him take the Giro win. Jai Hindley we're talking about. Tell me a little bit about Jai, or what you know about Jai, and what you think about this new generation and what his chances are, and how you sort of feel about him moving on and trying to tackle the Tour.
Yeah, it's going to be a big step for him going to the Tour. I think from when he was against Geoghegan Hart, if I can say his name correctly, when he ran second there, it looked like he was going to win, and I can relate to that situation. It was during COVID and that. I sort of wanted to contact his team. I was like, do you want me to come and beat the car? Because I think I've been in this situation before for the time trial or something. But it was all COVID and everything. So I didn't do that. But of course, I watched as a real fan, and that's for me in cycling now, especially my Stefania. Like, she watches every race. She watches more races than I do. So we watched that, of course, as a fan, because it was COVID and you couldn't travel. But when we could go and watch him, it was like, oh, well, let's get in our car and we'll go down and we'll watch him pass by on the finish line. And because we wanted to go to the podium, but it was in the amphitheatre and we had the baby jog and you can't actually fit in there. So so I didn't actually get to go to the podium, but I just watched as a fan on the side of the road. And I didn't get to speak to him face to face till he came to my race this year, actually. What he did, he amazed me with what he did when it looked like he wasn't going to be able to do it in the Giro last year. So I hope that's going to be indicative of in my mind, looking at the results in Liège and things, it's like, with him, I'd rather be a bit ahead of where he is, if like that was just me. But let's just let him take his path and let's just look at it. And my advice I gave to myself in my first tour, and I give the same advice to him. Okay, let's go and see what you can do, and then based on that, where you can go. And so let's not expect him to be on the podium or anything. Let's just see what he can do. And as long as he can avoid crashes, get everything down on the results sheet and see where that is, and then take it from there. Because the Tour really is, it's a different game, and it's a changing game as well. And what was good enough to win the Tour 2 years ago isn't going to be good enough to win the Tour in probably even this year. So I watch from a distance as a fan, and but yeah, that's an admiration and hope, of course, to see an Aussie up there. Of course, I'm always happy to see them up there. And we haven't had we've had a bit of bad luck. Our compatriots had a bit of bad luck in the last few years, so we haven't had, other than Jai coming through. We sort of results aren't we're not so often on the podium as we were used to seeing a few years ago.
Cadel, it's been an absolute honour, and thank you very much for all those in-depth stories. It's been great. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, really great to speak with you all, and great to talk to you. And thanks for reliving my mountain bike days, and know that listening to you talk to Ned and that was amazing. It gives me a whole renewed perspective. I'm just on that dad thing. That's the priority in my life now. So I'm going to run off and make some sandwiches and go and pick up a boy from his sailing school today, if that's all right with you. We'll speak again later. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Well, guys, what did you think of that? Did you learn something about Cadel Evans and how determined he is or was as a cyclist? There's no wonder he kept just coming back. That mentality he has, let alone his amazing physiology, the lung. I love that nickname. I really do. A big thanks goes out to Will Jones, who pieces these episodes together for you guys. The Life in the Peloton team, Meg and Paul behind the scenes. But of course, Rapha, our proud partner in producing the podcast this year. Guys, in 2 weeks' time, I have got an absolute cracker of an episode for you as well. It's called The Lead Out. Now, I was a bit of a lead out man myself when I was racing overseas, so it's a job that I really look fondly on, and I think it's an underestimated job. That is an episode I put together over the whole of this year. I've got some amazing guests on this. Brett Lancaster, Michael Morkov, Mark Renshaw, Kunda Court, Roger Klug, the best lead out men in the world, and Fast Freddy Rodriguez. This is an absolute chock-a-block episode that is going to come to you in 2 weeks' time. I'm heading over to the Tour de France next week. I'm going to be over there reporting on site with the cycling podcast like I did last year. So if you're not sick of hearing my voice already, get across to the cycling podcast. I'll be doing daily recaps with Francois Tomaso and Lionel Burney over there on the cycling podcast. But in 2 weeks' time, we have got the lead out coming to here at Life in the Peloton. Guys, until then, I hope you enjoy that episode. I hope you enjoy the Tour de France coming up. Stay tuned for that great episode. So guys, until then, cheers. The music in this episode was composed by Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.